Ramachandra Guha, India after Gandhi, The History of the World's Largest Democracy, 10th Anniversary Edition. India after Gandhi delves into the country's extraordinary journey to become the world's largest democracy. This comprehensive account takes a deep dive into the undercurrents of British colonization and addresses the skepticism surrounding India's capability for self-governance. As you explore the creation of India's republic, the book also highlights its vast diversity, its struggle for independence, and the founding of the Indian National Congress. Unfolding events reveal the iconic role of Gandhi in India's unification and the surprising outcomes of the country's first general election. The unfolding narrative includes India's relations with the US and USSR, its economic and societal transformations, and the tales of political successors.
India's journey to independence. India's transformation from British rule to an independent republic in 1947 was a remarkable and complex feat with historical significance. The British Raj, which had dominated the country since 1857, came under heavy opposition from the Indian National Congress, who believed in the viability of India as an independent state. Despite British skepticism and predictions of chaos, the Indian independence movement persisted, and eventually succeeded. The diverse regions of India, including princely states, were united for the first time, marking a significant historical achievement for India. This transformation was one of the greatest experiments in democracy of the modern era, following the French and American revolutions. The tragic partition of India. The book delves into the aftermath of India's independence from British rule, focusing on the religious tensions that led to the separation of Pakistan and the birth of India as a secular nation-state. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the leader of the Muslim League, called for a separate Muslim state, while Mahatma Gandhi sought to unite all Indians, regardless of their religion. Religious violence ensued, leading to the division of the country. Gandhi's efforts at peacekeeping were unsuccessful, and millions of refugees migrated between the two new nations, causing one of the largest migrations in history. Gandhi continued to promote nonviolence and attempted to stop the migration and violence, but he was assassinated by a Hindu extremist who opposed his efforts to protect Indian Muslims. The blame game of Indian partition. The decision to partition India was a consequence of multiple factors involving the British, Inc., and Indian Muslim politicians. The British exacerbated the communal tensions, Muslims were marginalized in British organized elections, while the Inc. failed to recognize the Muslim League's political overtures. Jinnah, the leader of Muslim League, championed for an independent state of Pakistan, and his party's victory in 1946 provincial elections laid the groundwork for dividing India. The process of partition entailed drawing borders on maps and redistributing populations along religious lines, causing the largest migration in human history. The region of Jammu and Kashmir, a significant strategic location, emerged as a flashpoint of conflict between India and Pakistan after independence. The unresolved conflict in Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir, once a Switzerland-like neutral state, has been the arena of an unresolved conflict between India and Pakistan for over 7 decades. The region's troubles began when it gained independence in 1947 and a small group of pro-Pakistan rebels attacked the prince's forces. Later that year, Pakistani raiders invaded the region, taking control of the state's capital, Srinagar, and slaughtering non-Muslim and Muslim civilians alike. The Hindu prince knew that he had no other choice than to ask India for military help, which led to India's intervention. The United Nations was called in, and Nehru and Jinnah argued for a plebiscite to allow the people of Jammu and Kashmir to choose which nation they would join. However, the inability to agree on an interim administration led to a stalemate, which still persists today. The unofficial line of control remains the de facto border between Pakistan and Indian-ruled Jammu and Kashmir. Despite numerous attempts at resolution, the conflict remains unresolved, leaving the region in a state of ongoing tension. India's refugee crisis and constitutional revolution. Millions of non-Muslim refugees settled on the Indian side after India's partition in 1947. The Indian government began allotting land for the refugees and also drafted a constitution to achieve national and social revolutions, allowing democracy, liberty, and equality for all citizens. The constitution reserved seats for the untouchables, India's lowest caste, and gave women the right to vote for the first time. The Constitution was considered the most crucial political project since the signing of the American Constitution, guaranteeing universal suffrage for the nation. In 1947, India's partition resulted in millions of non-Muslim refugees settling on the Indian side. The refugee crisis was a massive challenge for the new nation, with refugee camps being set up everywhere, accommodating over 8 million refugees. However, the Indian government began allotting land to these refugees that was abandoned by Muslim refugees who had fled to Pakistan. By November 1949, 250,000 new allotments were created across East Punjab for the refugee arrivals. The Indian government also drafted a constitution between December 1946 to December 1949 that accommodated all citizens in what was considered the most crucial political project since the signing of the American Constitution. The Constitution aimed to achieve twin revolutions, one national and one social. The national revolution was to establish democracy and liberty for all citizens, while the social revolution aimed to emancipate women and the lower castes. As a result, women were given voting rights, and all religions had equal standing in the face of the law. The Constitution also reserved seats for the lowest caste, the untouchables, who had faced persistent discrimination over the centuries. Though the wounds of partition and the Kashmiri stalemate made life difficult for Nehru and the Inc., they managed to guarantee universal suffrage. The Indian Constitution was a historical achievement that secured democracy, liberty, and equality for all citizens. India proves democracy is possible. In 1952, India held its first general election, defying the belief that democracy couldn't work in the country. Despite the challenges of illiteracy and poverty, an innovative voting system using symbols and novel advertising methods contributed to the success of the election. Jawaharlal Nehru, the leader of the Indian National Congress, won a majority in parliament and began to implement his party's political program. However, India's neutrality during the Cold War and its socialist policies strained its relationship with the United States, while its ties with the Soviet Union strengthened. Overall, India's successful election proved that democracy was possible in the country despite earlier predictions of partition and chaos. India's modernization journey. India's journey towards modernization under Nehru's leadership involved economic and social reforms that aimed to make the country self-sufficient. The 5-year plans focused on agricultural reform, massive dam construction, land reform bills, and rapid industrial expansion. The state played a key role in managing energy, iron, steel, and other major industries, while the private sector concentrated on producing consumer goods. The plans were successful, with GDP increasing 3.6% and meeting most of the growth targets. In addition, India's constitution supported women's and minority rights, including the right for women to choose their partners and inherit property equally with men, as well as reversing years of discrimination against the scheduled castes. These policies helped Nehru and the Indian National Congress win a majority of the scheduled caste seats in the 1957 election. India's troubles in the late 1950s. The aftermath of the 1957 national election in India saw changes in the country's state governments due to regional opposition. One of the state governments taken over by the Communist Party of India implemented rapid reforms that threatened the power of landowners and religious groups. Prime Minister Nehru was forced to dismiss the state government, despite believing in the reforms. In addition to this political crisis, worsening relations with China regarding territorial disputes in Tibet and along their shared border led to border clashes and a brief war in 1962, which resulted in India's loss of territory and damaged its self-image. Indira Gandhi's path to leadership. After the death of her father, Jawaharlal Nehru, Indira Gandhi was chosen as his successor as Prime Minister of India. Her leadership began with various challenges, including drought, food shortages, violence against Indian Muslims, and regionalist parties. Gandhi's party suffered its worst election since independence, causing her to shift her governing towards radical left policies, including nationalizing India's largest private banks. The Supreme Court attempted to quash the nationalization, but Gandhi called for an early election in 1971 to show popular backing. Her agricultural policies paid off, doubling wheat production and quelling famine worries. She then secured her popular backing by addressing 300 gatherings of 20 million people and received nearly double the vote of the next largest party in the election. The birth of Bangladesh and the rise of JP movement. In 1971, East Pakistani nationalists under the Awami League won virtually all of the East Pakistani seats, which surprised the West Pakistani leadership so much that they decided to cancel the results of the election. A massacre of Bengali students by Pakistani soldiers marked what became known as the Bangladesh Liberation War. As a result, Bengali guerrilla fighters began launching cross-border raids, and full war broke out between India and Pakistan in December. Pakistan surrendered after a mere 13 days, and 3 months later, Bangladesh joined the family of nations as an independent state. On the domestic front, increasing incidents involving corruption in the ink were becoming known, and steep rises in commodity prices were causing mass frustration. In the eastern state of Bihar, student protests erupted and universities were forced to shut down. The movement grew exponentially after recruiting a veteran social campaigner Jayaprakash Narayan, known as JP, who staged a 750,000-strong rally in Delhi demanding the removal of the Bihar Assembly, as well as electoral reform and anti-corruption investigations against INC officials. Mrs. Gandhi, who remained unmoved, began taking the protests seriously after a past minor run-in she had with the law. The rise and fall of India's first female dictator. In 1975, after being accused of breaching spending limits during her election campaign, Mrs. Gandhi's election was nullified by the Allahabad High Court pending appeal to the Indian Supreme Court. What followed was a state of emergency declared by Mrs. Gandhi, where political opposition was imprisoned, civil liberties abolished, and freedom of the press curtailed. With her new dictatorial powers, Mrs. Gandhi implemented a radical policy program. But the chorus of international condemnation at the emergency laws grew, causing her to lift the state of emergency 17 months later, as well as opening up the jails and announcing new elections. The rise and fall of Janata Party. Following Mrs. Gandhi's brief dictatorship, a united political opposition emerged in India against the Indian National Congress, Inc. The Janata Party, composed of individuals across the ideological spectrum, was formed with the sole purpose of punishing Mrs. Gandhi. In the 1977 election, the Janata Party gained victory and ended the Inc's reign. However, the Janata Party soon fell into the same corrupt practices as the Inc., only taking 12 months to do so. The constant shifting of alliances and party squabbles made governing impossible. This created chaos, and incidents of caste violence occurred. One such incident saw 9 former untouchables burnt alive by an upper caste mob, prompting Mrs. Gandhi to make a political comeback, shedding light on the scheduled castes. Janata attempted to arrest Mrs. Gandhi twice, with no success, and her martyr-like image causing her to regain power in 1980 with a landslide victory. However, her second term in office was fraught with hardships, both personal and political. India's turbulent decade. India experienced a tumultuous time in the 1980s, starting with the violent Sikh insurgency in Punjab. Mrs. Gandhi's refusal to dismiss Sikh members of her security detail resulted in her assassination. Her son, Rajiv, became Prime Minister after her death and made a deal with the Sikhs to end the violence. Hindu-Muslim tensions resurfaced when right-wing Hindu nationalists demanded access to a mosque built on a site believed to be the birthplace of the Hindu deity Rama. Rajiv gave in to their demands, and a new TV show helped radicalize the Hindu religion. Increased Hindu nationalism loomed, creating a tense and uncertain future for India. India's economic reforms and political turmoil. In the mid-1980s, India's ruling party, Indian National Congress, endeavored to please the middle classes by reversing decades of state control over the economy, resulting in an economic boom. However, this shift neglected the rural masses, who were suffering from food scarcity due to droughts. This political strategy affected the INC's political prospects in the run-up to the 1989 election, resulting in their defeat and subsequent replacement by a minority coalition government. The new government faced turmoil immediately, particularly in Kashmir, where violence erupted after the kidnapping of a prominent politician's daughter. The military intervention led to an insurgency that persists to this day.
The 10th anniversary edition of India After Gandhi is an enlightening journey through India's complex political history. The book uncovers the key achievements and challenges that have shaped the country's modern identity, while offering insights into the pivotal moments during India's struggle for independence. It also traces the country's transition after British rule, the rise of the Indian National Congress, and the formation of the new republic. Furthermore, it studies the various leaderships and their policies, detailing the relationships with global powers, economic and social challenges, and the ever-changing political landscape. This book is an invaluable source for understanding India's dramatic political transformation, from the uncertainty of the British Raj to the establishment of the world's largest democracy.